And we're back for another episode of Standpoint. I'm Gabe Groisman. You might notice, for those of you watching, we are in a different setting. We're setting up a home studio here so we can bring more content to you. It's not fully set up, but the sun is shining outside, so we figured, why not? Let's get started. And today we invited a friend of mine, Josh Hammer. So, why not? He could see us as we're getting set up. Josh, welcome to the show.
Gabe, you're a friend, and I appreciate you having me, buddy.
Yeah, for sure. Josh is a senior editor at large at Newsweek, where he hosts the Josh Hammer Show. You got to say that 5 times fast. It would be difficult. It's a podcast and a syndicated radio show. He's also a syndicated columnist. If you follow him online, it's dizzying because the amount of content this guy puts out, actual substantive content, it's incredible. He's a research fellow with the Edmund Burke Foundation, a fellow with the Palm Beach Freedom Institute, and he's the counsel and policy advisor for the Internet Accountability Project. And while we were setting up, I asked him about the step and repeat behind him, the background behind him, and he told me now he has a new project where he's senior counsel in the Article 3 project, helping me get conservatives appointed to the bench around the country. So, Josh, thanks so much for joining.
Yeah, you bet. I'm a busy guy, but I always have time for you, Gabe.
Thank you. Thank you. By the way, I saw you today posting about how happy you are you moved to Miami a few years ago and how you feel like you're on vacation every day. So, I mean, we met before you moved to Miami, but when you did move to Miami, we sat and had a coffee right in the beginning, kind of trying to figure out your bearings. So how's that been so far?
Yeah, I remember that coffee very well. We met at Panther Coffee. I remember it just like you were yesterday, actually. By the way, Gabe, you were the one who turned me on to the idea of dress sneakers. I don't know if I've told you that, but I had heard about this from afar, and I saw you wearing it. I was like, you know what, like that kind of works. I mean, like that's like a new thing. So I lived in Texas for 7 years. I lived in Texas for 4 years. I bought 7 pairs of cowboy boots when I was there. I don't really get to wear them as often these days. Although there is a nice rodeo actually in Davie, Florida that I've been to a couple of times. But I followed your lead with the dress sneakers. But I digress here into a sartorial aside. Florida's been amazing. I mean, my 3-year Florida anniversary is August 25th. Really hard to believe. It feels like it was just yesterday that I landed here at Miami International Airport. I live kind of a little closer to Fort Lauderdale now, but somewhere in the murky middle of these two great cities. I absolutely love living in Florida, and God willing, I'm not going to move anywhere anytime soon. I met my now wife here. My in-laws live right around the corner. My parents are going to get a place here. My life is here, and I really do feel like I live in paradise every single day, and I'm just so happy to be a Floridian at this point.
On the dress shoes thing, they're not a sponsor yet, but acemarks.com, that's the best place to buy dress shoes. My friend's company, Paul, it's these guys make the best shoes in Miami. You get away with it. And we know I've been to Texas many times for business, for politics, whatever it is. You got to put on the boots. I still don't know how people take off the boots. I know that's a Miami guy. Putting them on is easy. Looking good in them is easy. Everyone looked good in some cowboy boots, but taking them off is freaking impossible. I'm a Miami guy. Just give me a pair of sneakers and I'm good to go.
Trust me, it gets easier the more you do it, actually.
That's what they say. I've never passed that hump. So, Josh, look, both of us, our background is in law. I was a litigator primarily for 15 years. You were also a litigator. We're a law clerk, and then both of us kind of got involved in politics in different ways, commentating. I served the intersection of law and politics. I haven't seen it in a way that we're seeing it now ever. I mean, the amount of the amount that law and lawfare and the bringing of lawsuits across this country is intersecting, is impacting politics, is something that I haven't seen before, in a way where, usually we're thinking about how to add to the conversation, not just talk. But, last week we did a special episode just on the Trump indictment and conviction, just breaking it down because people don't understand when you just look at these documents, what do they actually mean? Are you seeing the same thing? Are you seeing the use of lawfare through political means more than you've seen in the past in the United States?
Well, 100%. I mean, if I could go higher than 100%, I would go higher than 100%. So, I mean, the Article 3 project, which is behind me and where I'm now senior counsel, I mean, we're kind of the tip of the spear pushing back against Democrat lawfare all across this country. I mean, Donald Trump is obviously a unique individual, but this is not currently limited to Donald Trump. What's happening to Donald Trump, Gabe, from my perspective right now, is nothing short of despicable and disgusting. Being criminally prosecuted in 4 separate jurisdictions, 2 federal, 2 state. Then you have this civil suit that's brought by a third-party intervener, the Attorney General of New York State, Tish James, trying to bankrupt the Trump organization. They had that verdict that found him liable for $400+ million. Ultimately, got it down on the bail. But the whole situation against Trump I mean, these are republic-ending tactics, Gabe. I mean, I frequently get asked the question, what happens if someone wins the presidential election while being a convicted felon? What happens if someone wins a presidential election if he's in a jail cell, Nelson Mandela style, stuff like that? And my answer is, it's a very law student answer. The Constitution is silent for the very simple reason that the constitutional framers never in their wildest dreams would have contemplated a situation whereby you would have a former president who, oh, by the way, is a current presidential candidate for a major party being prosecuted by his political opposition. And, it's doubly ironic and hypocritical on top of that, Gabe, because a lot of our interlocutors on the left side of the aisle like to complain that President Trump and modern day MAGA Republicans are an authoritarian threat. They're a threat to our democracy and things like that. Are you kidding me? Are you absolutely kidding me? There is one candidate in this presidential election who is literally prosecuting with the intent of trying to put in a jail cell and, oh, by the way, bankrupt his entire organization. That's the Tish James thing. There's one candidate who's trying to do that to the other. It's not Donald Trump to Joe Biden. It's Joe Biden to Donald Trump. So I find the whole situation just repulsive, and I find it doubly repulsive as a lawyer because many lawyers are getting caught squarely in the crosshairs here. So let's take, for example, my friend John Eastman. I've been friends with John for a very long time. I did the Claremont Institute's John Marshall Fellowship. That's their legal fellowship. John headed that. He and I both went to University of Chicago Law School. So we kind of just run in similar circles. I've known John for a long time. John had the unenviable task of being Donald Trump's lawyer or one of his lawyers in the lead up to January 6, 2021. Now, people can disagree among themselves over the advice that John Eastman gave to Donald Trump, over Mike Pence and Donald Trump and all that. I'm not going to get into saying that's a little too far afield. The point is that in that case, someone like John Eastman was doing his job as a lawyer. When I took legal ethics in law school, Gabe, you are taught to zealously advocate for your client's interests. That's exactly what Eastman did there. He was advocating a novel constitutional theory not tested by the courts, and now he's being criminally prosecuted for his troubles in both Georgia and Arizona. He's being disbarred in California. He lost multiple faculty teaching positions in California, his visiting fellowship in Colorado. He's been debanked by both Bank of America and the USAA. And it's not just John Eastman either. I mean, Rudy Giuliani, my friend Jenna Ellis, the list just goes on and on and on. It's out of control. It is absolutely out of control right now. And sometimes, Gabe, I pinch myself and, I look at kind of, I have this gavel on my desk that I took from when I was a federal law clerk on the Fifth Circuit in Texas years ago. And I kind of look at this and I think, was I naive? I mean, was I naive for thinking in the Constitution and the rule of law? But ultimately, these are ideas that are worth fighting for, which is what I try to do to the best of my abilities on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, in a way, when you talk about a threat to democracy, you think about in our country, there's the element of federalism, right, in local and state government and decentralized power, which in theory is supposed to and has been in large part, really the mechanism that has helped our country grow, where we have laboratories of democracy and the country looks different in different places and the best ideas win, et cetera, with the framework that the Constitution gives us or the guardrails that the Constitution gives us on the outside. But it's kind of been flipped on its head where you have local prosecutors, local district attorneys, local even U.S. attorneys on the federal level, just taking these initiatives on their own. But we'll get back to the on their own part, but taking these initiatives and which can really turn the entire country on its head. And in fact, it is turning the country on its head during the most important period of time for any country, which is an election period. But the question that's underneath there is, how much do you think the Biden administration is behind these local prosecutors? We know that they could pick up the phone and get them to stop, but how much are they actually actively behind these prosecutions? What have you seen?
So look, I mean, there is a lot of smoke. I mean, there is not kind of a single smoking gun. This is part of what I think Congressman Jim Comer of Kentucky, he's the chair of the House Oversight Committee. That's part of what he was getting at in the impeachment inquiry, which admittedly became something of a bit of a fishing expedition there. Start with the federal prosecutors. I know you're asking about the local, but obviously, there's this idea, Gabe, where people think of the special counsel as being kind of this independent entity who was outside of the Department of Justice chain of command. That's not true. There actually used to be an old school independent counsel. Justice Antonin Scalia had a timeless dissent in a case called Morrison versus Olson from the late 1980s, where he famously said that this was unconstitutional. And although it was a solo dissent at the time, the legal academy came to vindicate him. And because of that, they let the independent counsel statute expire. So now there's just this special counsel who's not at all independent of the Department of Justice. He directly reports to the Attorney General. We saw that back in February, by the way, when Robert Hur, a different special counsel, was reporting directly to Merrick Garland when he released when Robert Hur released the findings of his year-long investigation into Joe Biden's own classified documents scandal there at his Washington, D.C. center. So when it comes to the two federal prosecutions of Jack Smith, anyone who says that this is not directly coming from Joe Biden and Merrick Garland just doesn't know what they're talking about. It obviously is directly coming. Now, the state and local prosecutions, obviously, it's a little bit more complicated. So you have Alvin Bragg in New York City and Fani Willis in Georgia there. There is a lot of smoke. There is a lot of smoke there. Fani Willis seemed to visit the White House counsel's office an awful lot around the time that she was beginning to file this prosecution in Georgia. She visited, if memory serves, she or one of her associates was in and out potentially upwards of dozens of times. Now, again, there's no smoking gun here where you see, okay, they're on this email chain, someone is literally saying, okay, you got to go ahead and get Trump now. Alvin Bragg in New York City, for what it's worth, he's a Soros-funded guy. He's probably doing it largely of his own initiative. He literally ran on a Get Trump platform there. But we don't really know exactly what kind of messaging is happening behind the scenes here. It definitely seems at a broader level like there is coordination going on. Admittedly, there is no smoking gun. But the fact that Fani Willis and her team was in and out of the White House here, I think indicates that a lot of this at a certain level is definitely being coordinated.
And Josh, we're going to take a quick break from the show to talk about our sponsor, The Wellness Company. Guys, these days, everything is about being prepared. After the pandemic, we realized that all the systems that are put into place to take care of us may not be there when we need them. What's first? Medications. The next pandemic, whether it's the bird flu or just something complicated getting around, we can't just rely on running to the doctor and making sure we get our prescription in time. The Wellness Company has something incredible called the Contagion Kit. You call in, you get a prescription, and you buy this Contagion Kit, which is full of the main medications you may need in case of emergency, in case things go wrong. It includes a Z-Pack, it includes a nebulizer, ivermectin, all the things that people would need in these moments. Check them out at twc.health/Gabe. They're running a special for our listeners. It's 10% off and free shipping. twc.health/Gabe. Check out the Wellness Company. There's a Contagion Kit. Everyone should have one in their home. Now back to the show. Thanks. And Josh, when you look at the cases, I mean, when you look at the cases, I don't want to do what the left does, which is sort of just like paint them all together. They're all garbage, throw them out. The left will do the opposite, right? Trump's a bad guy, so of course there's cases against him, right? That's what most people will say, even smart people will say. Of course there's cases against him. It's Trump. He's done a lot of bad things in his life. So when we look at the cases, and just quickly to go through them, we have the documents case in Florida. It's 40 counts stemming from his alleged mishandling of sensitive government records and obstruction, which is really, I think, essentially the allegation is he ignored the subpoenas. That's the case that was set to begin on May 20th, and Judge Cannon indefinitely postponed it. It's interesting that's how they put it. She just didn't put a date on it and when it's coming back. Then we have the election case, 2020 election case in D.C. That's the Jack Smith one that's going up to the Supreme Court. Well, it went up to the Supreme Court. And then we have the Georgia election case. What am I missing?
Those are the three criminal prosecutions left. I mean, you had this appeal in New York, obviously, this hush money payment case with Stormy Daniels and Michael Cohen. So Trump's going to get his shot at appeal there. But yeah, those are the four. And then, of course, you have this civil fraud case as well, which had this, this finding that the Trump organization was liable for $460+ million in damages. That was the whole debate over whether Trump could even post bail. They ultimately got the bail down to $160 million. That one pertained to alleged fraudulent bookkeeping when it came to kind of overestimating the value of their properties for purposes of securing loans with Deutsche Bank and various other white shoe investment firms there. But yeah, you got the prosecutions right. So the Georgia case, the Fani Willis January 6, 2020 election case, at this point is being postponed all the way until October. And, I'm sure your audience remembers why. It's because Fani Willis had hired this special prosecutor, Nathan Wade, who happened to be her illicit extramarital affair lover. And then she ended up paying him to the tune of $600,000 to $700,000 off the Georgia taxpayers' back. And then you had the district court judge there, Scott McAfee, who tried to do this Solomonic baby splitting of a remedy where he basically said one of you has to go off the case, but the other can stay. So the special prosecutor left, Fani Willis stayed. Now the Georgia Court of Appeals is going to hear in October whether or not that is actually the way it works, or whether or not Fani herself has to leave, and they've paused all the trial proceedings until then. So the Georgia case is basically on the back burner right now. So the two cases
before you move off the Georgia case, right? The Georgia case, to a little bit about what it's about, right? It's about the allegation that Trump said, "Find me some more votes," right? In Georgia, that's really the heart of that case.
Yeah, it has to do with that infamous phone call, January 3rd, 2021, where Trump calls Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, and he said, essentially, "Find me more votes." You have this whole alleged conspiracy of fictitious electors to the Electoral College there. That's basically the so-called RICO racketeering conspiracy from Fani Willis there. But that's all very much on the back burner right now. So it's really the two federal probes from Jack Smith that are currently live balls, in addition to whatever happens next month at Trump's sentencing for the hush money case and appeal and all that. And the two federal cases, one is United States versus Trump, the case currently pending before the U.S. Supreme Court. That case, Gabe, I think is also going to probably get pushed until past the election, if I had to guess, because what's going to happen there, in this case, similarly to the Georgia case, involves the 2020 election in January 6th. It's another conspiracy to defraud the United States government, racketeering case, very kind of grandiose charges here. In my opinion, a lot of the underlying speech was First Amendment protected speech, because even if you think that Trump was saying lies during that time period, even if you want to concede that for the sake of argument, you have a First Amendment right to lie in this country, with some exceptions, with some very narrow exceptions. Congress passed the Stolen Valor Act, so you can't say that you served overseas and got a certain badge of honor from the military. There are narrow exceptions, but you generally have a First Amendment right to lie. Again, defamation, there are exceptions, but in this case, I think Trump's speech was protected. In any event, what the Supreme Court is hearing in U.S. versus Trump, and we'll get a ruling here probably over the next few weeks, is the scope, breadth, and depth of presidential immunity from criminal prosecutions after you are president. So Trump's lawyers made, as lawyers have to do, make the strongest form argument, which is absolute immunity. And then on the other side, Jack Smith said no immunity. They're probably going to carve out a middle ground remedy where they're going to say some acts are immune from prosecution, core presidential constitutional functions, commander-in-chief, war powers type stuff. And then some functions, some acts are so removed from constitutional authority that you actually can prosecute them. The effect of this middle ground test, if the court does, as I predict, and many others predict that it will, is that they're going to have to then kick that down to the trial court to do a fact-finding mission to figure out whether or not the actions alleged by the special counsel, Jack Smith, in the indictments actually fit Category 1 or Category 2. And then, by the way, if Trump doesn't like the way that comes out, he can appeal it back again to the D.C. Circuit. So that's going to take a long time.
And if when that's going on, he's president, they're likely to kick it to after his presidency anyways.
Exactly. And if all this is going on when he's president, he probably will just pardon himself, as I personally think that he has every constitutional right to do and should do, because America is the greatest country in the world. We have the most powerful military, and you just can't be in a situation where the president of the United States is being prosecuted by his very own Justice Department. That is a completely unsustainable and untenable situation to be in.
For things he said while he was president.
Exactly, for things he said while he was president pertaining to a presidential election. The core of the First Amendment, Gabe, is political speech. That really is why the First Amendment is there. It's not necessarily, I'm not saying that you don't have a First Amendment right to pontificate about whether or not you should dye your hair purple tomorrow, or whether or not, like, so-and-so, her new song on this album or culture stuff. Yes, you have a right to say that stuff, but the reason that it is there, the reason that the First Amendment is there, the core of it, the crux of it, is political speech. And it doesn't matter. It does not matter for constitutional purposes whether or not the underlying speech is truthful or untruthful. It is there to protect that speech within extraordinarily broad confines regardless there. So that's basically the Jack Smith case in Washington, D.C. And then the other Jack Smith case here in our neck of the woods in Florida, Judge Aileen Cannon's courtroom is in Fort Pierce, so a little bit further north of where you and I live there. That's the classified documents case. Now, I appreciate, Gabe, the way that you framed this whole line of questions, because you said, let's go case by case here. That's the way that I like to do it as well. And, I'm intellectually honest, right? So I will readily concede, from my perspective, the classified documents case had the most potential, I think, for an actual conviction if Jack Smith had taken it in a different direction. So you mentioned the obstruction charge when Trump allegedly ignored a grand jury subpoena. You can't do that. Okay, you cannot ignore a grand jury subpoena. One way or the other, you just can't do that. So if Jack Smith had charged him with obstruction, pure and simple, I think he probably would have had a fairly clean case and at least a decent shot to ultimately get a plea deal or a conviction of some sort. But he shot the moon. He went for the moon by whipping out the Espionage Act, which is this dusty World War I era statute that civil libertarians, First Amendment scholars have long despised. A lot of people think it's unconstitutional. And you typically use the Espionage Act, Gabe, to go after people like Julian Assange or Edward Snowden or Bradley Manning, Chelsea Manning, whatever Manning's name is these days. That is typically who you go after with the Espionage Act. You don't go after a president of the United States over a document dispute. So
if you want to understand why, I mean, and you know this, but just to talk it through, and I haven't looked at this case in a while, but the underlying issue in the case is whether the subpoenas were valid or not. I think that's the position the defense is taking. And the reason why the prosecutor put in all of this espionage garbage is because under the Presidential Records Act, it's a dead end for him. So you need to find another reason why he's showing that the subpoenas are valid as a way to counteract the defense. But like you say, I also think that was a mistake because a subpoena, it could be I mean, we're going to learn if this case is ever adjudicated. But as far as I know, as a litigator, you get a subpoena, you have to respond to it, or you have to file an opposition to it and go in front of a judge. You don't really have the ability to ignore it, even if it's an invalid subpoena. I think that's going to be their position as well. This is an invalid subpoena. So yes, you have to comply with valid subpoenas, legally sufficient subpoenas, but not just garbage written on a piece of paper. And I think the prosecutor, I agree with you, was just trying to go that extra mile, A, for legal purposes, but also B, because an obstruction of justice case against a president or a former president isn't sexy enough for the headlines. And we have to think that that's something that they're trying to sell as well.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, look, is Jack Smith technically a politician? No, I guess not. But at a certain level at least, all prosecutorial decisions have at least a tint of politics to them, especially prosecutorial decisions at this level here. You know, Jack Smith knows who his audience is. I'm not sure what he wants to do with the rest of his life here. Maybe he wants to go cash out and get a 7-figure book deal. Maybe he wants to go be a talking head on CNN or MSNBC. I'm not entirely sure. But, you know, whether it's that or go be like a liberal law professor somewhere there, you know, he knows that he had to kind of throw all the books and then some against a former president there. And I think you're totally right. I mean, that was exactly the motivation that went into this. That case probably is also not going to reach trial, though, before November. At least I would be very surprised there. Judge Cannon is being very cautious. She's being very deliberate here. Actually, there's going to be a hearing later this June in Judge Cannon's courtroom on the classified documents case, just to ascertain whether or not Jack Smith was validly legally appointed in the first place. So it remains to be seen whether Judge Cannon actually kicks off Jack Smith from this prosecution in its entirety, which of course would basically throw the whole thing out the window.
That would be amazing. I mean, amazing to see from the political theater standpoint, and also as someone who's really opposed to these kind of cases, it would be amazing to see that happen. Look, on Friday, it's Monday right now, and this episode will probably air later today, if not tomorrow. On Friday, before the end of the day, we got some news from the New York courtroom where the judge said, well, you know, on the electronic filing system, someone filed a note saying, my cousin's the juror, and he told me that Trump's going to be found guilty. And what do you think can happen there? I mean, obviously, as a lawyer, we see something like that, a juror talking before a verdict is reached to someone outside of the jury. It's usually grounds for a mistrial. What do you think? What do you think we're going to see there?
Yeah, I mean, this broke kind of later on Friday, just before Shabbat for us Jews, and you know, I think a lot of us were trying to like frantically figure out what was going on, right? And it is a little curious that the judge Juan Merchan decided to make this public. He publicly informed the prosecutors, the defense attorneys. I mean, you would like to assume that a judge, whether it's a federal or a state judge, would at least look into the authenticity of the conduct in a situation like this before making a big public stink of it, especially in a case of this high profile of a magnitude, the first ever criminal conviction of a former president of the United States. Sorry?
I said one would hope.
Oh yeah,
That's what you would do.
yeah, no, one would definitely hope. Yeah, exactly. But that's not what happened here because I mean, upon looking under the surface here, as I did, and as I think many others did, at least a little bit there, it looks like it was spurious. I mean, it has all of the indications of being false. The guy who posted this comment is a literally self-described professional something poster that I will not say on this family-friendly show. He was making all sorts of ridiculous comments. If you go to the Facebook page, that appears to be, I mean, who knows if Mike Anderson, this was even his real name there. The guy's a troll. Okay, he's a troll. I mean, he literally just went to the court's public Facebook page and was just trying to kind of cause a ruckus for the sake of causing a ruckus. And because people these days tend to be very gullible, it appears that he succeeded. So I don't think this is going anywhere. I haven't really heard the Trump legal team even talking very much about it, which I think says all you need to know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it'll prove to be a much bigger story than I thought it was. I don't think I'm wrong. It's actually interesting, though, because even from a political perspective, I don't think Donald Trump wants a mistrial. If he has a mistrial, I mean, let's think about what that means. That means that he has to go back to New York City and spend basically a whole nother month in that courtroom. Does he really want to do that? I mean, that's a whole month that he would much rather be out in Wisconsin, Michigan, on the campaign trail there. And whatever the sentence actually is, come July 11th, that's when the sentencing will come down there. It will probably not. I can't guarantee it, but it will probably get stayed. Okay, not necessarily by the appellate division, but at least by the New York Court of Appeals. It'll probably get stayed pending appeal. So even if he's sentenced, God forbid, to Rikers Island, which I don't actually anticipate that, but let's say the worst case scenario, God forbid that, in all likelihood, that will get stayed and he'll probably be back on the campaign trail a day or two after that. So, from a political trying to win the presidential election standpoint there, I actually don't even think a mistrial is a very good thing for Donald Trump. So I wouldn't even touch it, honestly.
Yeah, he wants to move forward. I mean, his poll numbers have gone up. We could talk about that in a little bit. They took a little dip yesterday, but it's still well within the margin of error. I think people were just to jump to the left was celebrating about some swing state poll that came out over the weekend. I think it was CBS that had Biden up 50 to 49% on average on these swing states with the 3 point. I think it's hold on, here it is. The margin of error is 3.8%. I mean, so it's still well within the margin of error, but we all know, we've seen the fundraising bump that Trump got. This as many of us suspected it was going to happen. This was going to spill all over the face of the Democrats that were trying to hurt Trump on this case. Most Americans see these cases and see the nonsense in the cases. But I still think it's important, like we did just a little bit, and we don't have so much more time, but to go through each of the cases to understand them, because it's so easy to, on both sides, on our side, just say, hey, it's all garbage. It's against Trump. We know it's garbage. And on the left, just go and say, well, of course there's cases against Trump. He's a bad guy. We should expect more from ourselves to actually look at these things and look at them and realize how they're nonsense. But look, on the other side, just to play devil's advocate a little bit, we have the Hunter Biden cases. I mean, I'm sure there's more if we scratch deeper, but we have the Hunter Biden cases going on right now. The case that's in trial as we speak is the lying on the gun purchase form agreement, saying that he's not a drug addict when he clearly was a drug addict. He probably wouldn't be in trial at all if they wouldn't have offered him such a ridiculous deal. So they kind of got shamed into having a trial. But the trial is still going on. It is a show trial, if you ask me, in the sense of, it's obvious he's a drug addict, going through all his history as a drug addict, and it's political theater in a way. But prosecutors prosecute these kind of cases all the time. If you speak to any federal prosecutor, they do these gun charge cases all the time. So, I mean, what do you think about that case? And then obviously he's got his big tax fraud case, which is the underlying case that they tried to tie together here in the settlement.
Yeah. So a couple things going on here. So first of all, as you said, the special counsel, David Weiss, who by the way shouldn't even be a special counsel because he is actually the U.S. attorney for Delaware. I mean, it's legal nerd aside, directly in violation of the special counsel statute. You're not allowed to actually do that. I'm not sure how that worked out. But in any event, David Weiss is prosecuting Hunter Biden on the tax stuff out in California and this gun background check form in Delaware. But as you said, he tried to get this sweetheart plea deal in the Delaware case where Hunter Biden wouldn't serve any jail time whatsoever. And it was only because the Judge Mary Ellen Noriega, actually reviewed the plea deal and started asking some very basic questions to the prosecutor that whole thing fell apart last July or August or so. So good for the judge in this case, for this case even getting to trial, because if the DOJ, if the Justice Department had its way, then this thing wouldn't have even made the trial after they slow walked the investigation over the course of 5-6 years. I mean, the Hunter Biden probe started back in 2018 or 2019, a very long time ago. David Weiss slow walked and slow walked and slow walked. So yes, finally, we have these trials. The tax one in California. Let's see what happens. That's not starting for a few months now. It was going to start also in June, but they pushed it back because they didn't want to do 2 trials at the same time. The gun case, Gabe, I mean, Hunter Biden is completely dead to rights on these charges. I mean, it's not even a close call. I mean, 18 U.S. Code 922, you are not allowed to be addicted to a controlled substance under the Controlled Substances Act at the time that you fill out that ATF form, which, you know, everyone who's filled out a gun form knows what I'm talking about here. He very, very, very clearly did it. And the question at this point, I think that this is a test. This is a real test out in the open for the impartiality or fairness of the justice system. Is Hunter Biden actually going to serve jail time? Is this a maximum 25 years in jail for the crimes that he very, very, very much seems to have committed? So if he gets off with a slap on the wrist, with probation, with house arrest, with something like that, you know, I'm going to cry foul. And I think that many, many people across the political spectrum who are going into this thing with open eyes would cry foul as well. So I am really, really eager to see how this ends, because this is not a close call on the evidence. He is guilty as can be. But one other thing here, as you alluded to, it's all a bit of a distraction. The tax stuff, the gun stuff, it's very much a distraction from the meat and potatoes of Hunter Biden's illicit life over the past decade, which is this global influence peddling scheme. The fact that back when Joe Biden was still vice president of the United States and Barack Obama's point man on Ukraine, the fact that Joe Biden was orchestrating a meeting between Joe Biden and the prosecutor in Ukraine, who was looking into prosecuting Burisma, this corrupt Ukrainian energy firm that was paying Hunter Biden $83,000 a month, no doubt for his expertise in Eastern European energy, I'm sure.
Right.
But you know, the list goes on and on. I mean, that infamous text that Hunter Biden sent to his Chinese counterpart in Shanghai about a sketchy private equity investment, saying the big guy is standing next to me, I bet he won't be happy if you don't do ... That is the core. That is the core of Hunter Biden's FARA violations and his various illegal, corrupt activities overseas. So the fact that the special counsel, David Weiss, decided not to touch any of that whatsoever, that kind of gives the game away, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I mean, the case, one thing this case has shown, so many of us have known this for so long already, but is how big the I don't even know the word to use is, but how big that the president, the administration, people like to use the term deep state. I'm not a fan of the term, but the deep state, just for arguments purposes, can actually move these false stories, whether it was the laptop, which we learned about, the being obviously was true, wasn't an FBI plant, wasn't a Russian misinformation campaign, or whether the fact that Hunter Biden was getting paid by Chinese and Ukrainian interests. And again, we had the current president Biden, during the debates saying, and both debates, or 2 of the debates, saying clearly that those are false stories. It's not true. It's absolutely false. We're seeing that, and how the media is complicit in pushing those narratives when it suits them, and the opposite, the inverse of the same, is what we're seeing on the Trump case, in the Trump cases. But look, Josh, what's scary to me is what happens next, right? So not just with these specific cases, it's clear the Hunter cases were brought to not have to bring the difficult cases. You know, he should have pled guilty, if you ask me, and then just asked for the court's mercy and taking what he got, and they probably would not have put him in jail, if not for too long, because of who he is. That's just a reality of life. But to go through this trial is just unbelievable. It's just such a surprise. But again, what's scary for me is what happens next. So Trump wins, which was what I hope and believe will happen in November. It's January. He takes office. You know, what happens next? The Pandora's box has obviously been swung wide open. And what's good for the goose is good for the gander. But that's going to, you know, I think from my perspective, it's bad for America, right? If we start seeing a cycle of prosecution every time there's a new president turning around and going after everybody that was in the previous administration, you know, that rings of Central America and Africa and all these different places where there's just rampant corruption, and sometimes they are going after people who are corrupt and deserved it, and many times it's just a way to stifle opposition. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, it does stink of Central and South America. It does stink of Sub-Saharan Africa and various other kind of failed states around the world. I mean, look, Gabe, I mean, growing up, if you had told me that in my young adulthood that we would be prosecuting and trying to incarcerate president of the United States, you know, let alone for doing so because of an alleged bookkeeping error in paying off a porn star about a one-night stand. I mean, I literally would have looked at you and be like, what country are we living in? Wait, what planet are we living on, for that matter? So I mean, we are in uncharted waters of uncharted waters at this point. And I believe in the rule of law. I mean, this country was founded upon an equal application of the rule of law. John Adams famously wrote about this in the Massachusetts Declaration of Rights. I mean, the founders were men who believed in the equality of law, as, by the way, our people, the Jews, do as well. It's right there in Leviticus. I mean, you don't judge someone any different, whether he is wealthy or he is poor. You're there just to judge equally. I mean, this is Western civilization. I mean, equal enforcement of the rule of law is a core tenet, not just of America's justice system. It's a core tenet of the Bible. It's a core tenet of Western civilization in general. So, I mean, I am as distraught as can be over the fact that this is where we currently are. Having said that, I live in reality, and I look at where we are, and the question that I ask myself is, how do we get back to that? How do we get back to this neutral enforcement of the rule of law paradigm, which may or may not have existed ever in reality, but at least definitely we used to do at least a little bit better of a job doing it. And at this point, Gabe, I am unable to come up with any better alternative than short to midterm escalation for the short of long-term sanity. It has to be something along the lines of mutually assured destruction. Basically, just try to bloody up some noses, proverbially speaking, to basically show them they can't do this without suffering any costs, and therefore we will all get to a place where we're not going to bring out the nuclear weapons. We will just bring out, some semi-automatic rifles. So what I mean in practice there, you obviously cannot just fabricate charges, okay? I mean, this is a rule of law society, still at a certain level. You can't just make stuff up, for lack of a better term. But surely, some local enterprising DA in a very deep red jurisdiction, call it the Texas Panhandle, someplace like that, some young 30, 35-year-old guy is trying to kind of make a name for himself in his state Republican Party and local conservative circles. Surely he can figure out some way, for example, that his constituents were wronged in a COVID context by Anthony Fauci and Deborah Birx, and try to figure out something to charge someone like that with, okay? So you're not going to make up the law, but you have to have a couple of high-profile examples just to get us back to this place of anything remotely resembling a neutral rule of law. Look, if there is a different alternative, I'm open to it. But I've seen a lot of people who I would not have expected to reach that conclusion. I saw John Yoo, the very well-known former Bush DOJ figure, who's a Cal Berkeley law professor. I've known John for years. We've done legal panels together, actually. John basically said that in a National Review op-ed a couple weeks ago at the end of May. He basically said, look, this is where we are. You're going to have to do a little tit for tat to get us back to neutrality. The day after the Trump verdict in New York City, I saw Megyn Kelly on her very popular show basically said that at this point, she wants to go full Steve Bannon, by which she meant just kind of, tit for tat, throw some punches. So I'm seeing a lot of people that I think are starting to realize what is happening out there. I've kind of been saying this for years, not to toot my own horn, but I've been a little ahead of the curve on this one there. The Obama administration, Gabe, the Obama administration sued nuns. They sued the nuns of the Little Sisters of the Poor because they didn't want to be subsidizing what they deemed to be abortifacients, abortion-inducing drugs. The left has been openly prosecuting its political enemies in this country for at least some time now. Obviously, you had the whole Lois Lerner IRS scandal around 2013 during the Obama administration as well. They are absolutely targeting conservatives, and it doesn't make me happy to be having this conversation. Like I said, I'm just trying to be a little bit realistic about where we are.
Yeah, and the question is just not to be oppositional. The issue is to not just be oppositional for the sake of being oppositional, meaning just doing the opposite of what they're doing and doing the same thing. I actually think Trump is the right guy to strike that balance, and people might be surprised to hear that. But just hear me out, because if you think of the lock her up episode with Hillary Clinton, and he was out there, he was saying it, he was blooding her up proverbially with his words and his chants and getting people riled up about it. But guess what? Then he became president and he said, I'm not going to prosecute her. It's over, right? Because what would that do to our society? And it's hard for people to realize that when they see Trump, even after he served for 4 years, is where there's the bluster and then there's the reality, right? So he gets out there, he says these things, whether it's strategic or not. A lot of times I think it is strategic, actually, when the Hillary Clinton stuff, I think, was political and there was something there. And there was also a reason to push that way. But I'm sure there were people in his ear saying, let's start something there. And he didn't want to do it, right? So I think he's actually the right person when he gets in power, hopefully, where, the locals are going to do what locals are going to do. So we're talking about local prosecutors trying to push cases, that's fine. But as far as the DOJ, which has always been political, has always been weaponized, but I've never seen anything like it that we're seeing now. I just hope we don't see the exact opposite next time around when we're holding the football, when the Republicans are again on offense, and we can try to bring it back to some normalcy, because that's what if we want to be a party of law and order and we want our country to succeed, we need to be there, right? We need to push back against the bad actors, but also not abuse the justice system the way the Democrats are doing now.
Yeah, it is striking a balance. I mean, it is striking a balance here. I mean, look, I candidly do think that you're going to have some higher profile prosecutions that strike a political mark, but you can do that while also making a substantive point. So, here's like one example here. We live in Florida, a major red state, Texas. Maybe in a Trump administration, a prosecutor in Florida or Texas files a high profile federal probe against someone who is running essentially an open borders human trafficking ring, right? Someone who is a hero of the left, who works for like an Amnesty International or some other kind of, open borders, pro illegal alien outlet. And therefore you're kind of killing two birds with one stone. You're kind of fulfilling this vague idea of trying to kind of prosecute something with political impact while also highlighting an issue, a substantive issue, immigration and the border, that very much plays to Democrats' detriment and to Republicans' benefit right now. So I think there's some way to actually do this while striking a bit of a sweet spot. Admittedly, it is easier said than done. I'm very open to the possibility that Donald Trump is the man to do it. You were right about the Hillary Clinton lock her up stuff. He talked about it and then of course never did it there. So a lot of that remains to be seen. But look, I mean, I'm a rule of law guy. I mean, I deeply lament where we are in this country. I clerked for a federal judge. I keep a pocket constitution on my desk. I still do Federal Society talks at law schools all across the country here. I love the Constitution. It's the reason I went to law school in the first place. And it really genuinely saddens me to see where we are right now. I'm just genuinely trying to kind of grapple with where we are and just try to kind of figure out a way to crawl our way out of this mess the best we can, while breaking as few omelets as possible, to kind of borrow that famous expression from the Soviets.
Yeah, and as someone who makes an omelet every morning, I like that one, because I try my best not to break the omelet either. Listen, I'm an optimist, Josh, and I think that America has seen what the other side looks like, what it looks like for us to become a banana republic, and Americans don't like it. And I'm hopeful that we're going to make the right decisions on both sides of the political aisle to bring things back to center. It may take some time. It may take some bloody lips, like the expression you used. But at the end of the day, I think the promise of America still stands, even though I tweeted right when it happens, the promise of America is broken, because it was broken. It has been broken with the prosecution of the president. But it's not broken forever. I think the system just allows itself now. We have November, a new election, a new slate of people, and I'm going to close the show with some optimism, because that's really what I believe. I still love this country, and I think that smart people are going to make the right decisions and keep us pushing in the right direction.
Yeah.
So Josh, thanks so much. Thanks for joining. Really appreciate your time. I appreciate all the work you do. You really, really put out such good content out there in all forms. Your speeches, your even your social media. Social media is usually pretty empty, but not yours. You really put out some great stuff. So everybody make sure to follow Josh and everything he does, and make sure to follow and subscribe to the show and all the great things you do to support podcasts. Thanks so much, and see you next week.